those are number 1 and 2, I think, for Korea.
Exactly, those are the main trading partners. So it's that's really, really smart. It's something I said last year when I was at this forum, to have these bilateral arrangements negotiated fairly quickly and can be changed fairly quickly depending upon how your economy changes. And what's smart about the arrangements for Korea is that your semiconductor agreements with the US is to supply the US with inputs for the high-end semiconductors, but also with China, you managed to negotiate with the US ways of getting around the sanctions. So I think that for Korea, this new regionalization, this new friendshoring is Korea shoring as far as the US is concerned. And I think that's something that is going to be very helpful for Korea going forward.
Before we, just a real quick question about Africa. Now, when we talked about this, none of you said, let me talk about Africa, but I don't think we do a good job talking about the world if we don't mention where does Africa fit into this new globalization. Frederick, do you want to try that one? I got Martin on the other side. If you don't, that's okay. Martin, you want to go ahead and then go to Bill?
Sure. What we've seen so far is Africa being a key supplier of commodities, in particular to China. And in return, getting a lot of infrastructure that is quite needed for the development and the logistics for Africa. Now, the key challenge that Africa has is that so far the Chinese policy towards this continent has been try to feed the industries that they needed to be fed in China, but more an extractive policy in terms of extracting minerals, extracting commodities, and not leaving value added inside of Africa. So what we've seen is a pretty stable growth in Africa of around 5%, but very strong inequality and in terms of the standards of living. So clearly the policy that China has had, which has been clearly creating warnings in Latin America, is it going to have an extractive policy in terms of our commodities? What is China going to leave in our countries in terms of value added, in terms of creating employment? So far, its influence in Africa has been basically to extract the minerals or what it needs to feed its industry, but yet has not left better standards of living, and that's clearly one of the challenges for one of the key regions in the world in terms of producing commodities vis-a-vis the future.
Bill, do you want to, I mean, because I understand that the Chinese companies are also building railways and power dams.
I think for Africa, one of the things that it's challenged by is it's got to build infrastructure, because as much as I say, China is subject to dismal demographics because of the aging population, and Korea is as well, Africa is the other end of it. The youngest population in the world is located in North Africa, and they need jobs. And in order to get jobs, they need infrastructure investment. The lesson there is beware of people coming with gifts, right? The Belt and Road strategy was say, oh, China says, I am here to help you build your infrastructure, but in doing so, I'll help you finance it. Now, China is the biggest creditor for emerging market economies, way over the IMF, way over the World Bank, way over anybody else. China is the largest creditor to emerging markets. And so China really has a very important role in restructuring this huge amount of debt, because it's very hard for these emerging market economies to pay them off. And so far, the restructuring that China has done has really not helped relieve the burden on these countries. In fact, in some cases, like in Djibouti and in other places, they've taken equity as payment. All right, you can't pay for the port is mine, right? Can't pay for the dam in Peru, the dam is mine. So that is in some ways my criticism of how China, as the main creditor of the world, has not really proceeded responsibly in restructuring debt.
Do you want to add to Africa, or
sure.
I'm ready for my last question?
Absolutely. I mean, I think sort of if we take that demographic viewpoint, I think there are huge opportunities that exist, especially in Western Africa, and looking at sort of Nigeria, Ghana. That link could be sort of pretty amazing. But they need to step out of the commodity cycle. They need to have an economy which is less responsive to how that cycle moves, and of course, which has always been, or not always, but for a long time been the main problem, which is that they need to have institutional stability. And if they don't have institutional stability with the economy and with the political system, it's going to be extraordinarily difficult to attract foreign investments and get that more investment-driven boom that they so much
I think
need.
the only point I'd add to that is there are 55 different countries in Africa. Some have amazing institutions, others have weak institutions, and we really have to look at place by place. I have one last question, then maybe we have time for a question or two from the audience. You know, we talk in this forum, we've been talking about innovation. We've been talking about AI and chips, and later today they're going to talk about neurological innovation. Bill, you mentioned demographic crisis. You know, is technology or is digital technology the solution to increase productivity so that even if we have a lower population, we'll still have prosperity, or is there something else going on? And how do you, all of you, see this? And I guess you want to start, Bill, and then
Sure.
maybe Frederick, you wrote a book
again,
on it, and we'll get everybody's opinion.
Let me just frame the difficulties here. The fertility rate here in Korea, as you all know, is 0.72%, right? There's 0.72 births for every couple out there. Yeah. In China, as bad as it is, it's 1.0. In Europe, it's 1.5. And in the US, it's close to 1 3/4.
But you need 2.2 to keep your population, right?
They're all declining. And so, but it's declining the worse in Korea. And I think one thing Korea has going for it is the high-tech AI kind of technology that you have. That is the biggest hope for increasing productivity and real wages and continuing to have growth. The trouble is how you execute it, because one thing that happened about globalization and new technology in the US, so many people lost their jobs because the technology, the way it was implemented, was the substitute for people. I gave a talk in Silicon Valley, and I said, the challenge to every software developer out there is to develop an interface for the software and for the AI and for the technology that's being put in place so that you make a high school graduate as productive as a PhD, right? Maybe that's not so productive. At least as productive as an MBA. and so the software interface...
It's too bad for our MBA students because they want to make more money than high school graduates.
Well, but high school graduates can be productive depending on how the software interface is put in place. And so if you use the people wisely, right, the people that you have, they can have very high incomes, very good jobs, but again, or they could lose their jobs, depending on how that technology is implemented. And that's really the key.
Yeah. Martin, you want to go ahead? And I'll let you close this one, Frederick. Go ahead, Martin.
Yeah, the two contributions that Latin America could do to, in terms of increase of productivity in the use of artificial intelligence are in agtech, in agricultural technology, for example, in terms of capturing what are the trends